thank Pat for hosting it, as well as Bob, Tony, Dave, Todd, and Ron for their comments. Now we're moving to our next speaker, who is not new to doing this. It's Jonathan Adelstein. He is the president and CEO of Wireless Infrastructure Association, WIA. WIA represents over 200 companies devoted to building wireless broadband facilities across the country. Mr. Adelstein served as commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, from 2002 to 2009, for which he is twice nominated by President George W. Bush and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. In 2009, following the FCC role, Mr. Adelstein was nominated by President Barack Obama to serve as the administrator of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utilities Service. A seasoned professional indeed, and an entertaining speaker. Let's welcome Jonathan Adelstein.
Well, thank you for that great introduction. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Great to be here again. You know, I've done this a few times, and it just keeps getting better. You know, it's an amazing group that Steve has put together. I never thought when I was at the FCC I'd be in the show business, but we've got our own event, and I know how much work goes into this. So I appreciate what Steve does. And let me figure out how this. See if I got. Get this clicker to work. There we go. Yeah, so we got our own show coming up. Woo! Now you're our target audience because you guys like shows. And what I've learned really is that the people that come to these are truly the leaders, are people that are trying to get to the next level, trying to get a little insight and cutting edge. And of course, we're real proud at WIA that at ConnectX, we really do bring together the whole industry. It's the biggest industry conference, obviously, in North America. It's the, we have the leading connectivity providers around the country, a lot of finance there. If you're looking for money, cash is flowing in our industry right now, and it will be flowing. The deals will be cut. Innovators are going to be there, all the latest technology, and I'm going to stay there. Some of you might have heard I got a little transition coming, but right before I move on, I'm going to stick around to see ConnectX, our amazing event, off to a good start. And as a lot of you know, that WIA is your voice in Washington. You know, I came to Washington from South Dakota in 1987. I never thought I'd be here, 35 years later. But we really make sure that the industry gets its voice represented in DC. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about, we talked earlier on this panel, it was a great panel, hard to follow that one up, about the infrastructure money. I'm going to get into where that's going. You know, it's interesting because the industry is going full tilt. Again, as we heard on this morning, my gosh, you know, there's so much investment going in. The carrier's active on 5G. You've got, you know, the fiber build out is really explosive right now on its own. Small cells are picking up, private enterprise radio, all kinds of expansions happening. And here comes federal funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA. And it was really kind of a special moment for me in my, 35 years, I said, in Washington. One of the greatest moments I had was when we won wireless in the infrastructure bill. And it doesn't mean that we got everything fixed, but what happened, you know, was we were seeing the White House focused on fiber. We were seeing Democrats in Congress focused on fiber. Their belief was you have to have fiber solutions to really make it work. And this really miraculous thing happened that, you know, maybe it only happens once in a lifetime, which is I was invited to testify in front of Congress right at a time, it was 3 days before they cut the deal. And the deal said, here's the broad parameters. We got, you know, $1.1 trillion, of which $65 billion is going to go into broadband, but they didn't say what was going to be in the $65 billion. So the ink hadn't even been put, the pen hadn't been put to paper yet, and I was able to make the case for wireless at a really special time. I was able to make it in the Senate, which is exactly where the deal was getting cut and the decision was being made days before the people put their heads down and got to work on writing it up. And so, that was a great opportunity because the case really hadn't been made as effectively for a number of reasons as it should have been. I got to be honest. I mean, we were behind the gun, and, it wasn't just us, but it was there's sort of this cabal that wanted fiber and believed, and it was really in the Democratic Party that this was happening. The former chairman of the FCC, Tom Wheeler, was obsessed with it. He convinced everybody, that wireless was not going to be able to keep up with consumer demand. And everybody said, we're going to do 100 standard, 100 megabits download, 100 megabits upload. And the purpose of that was to exclude wireless. Nobody needs frickin' 100 megabits upload. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. What you look at, download, upload. And of course, wireless can't do that. So they didn't care about upload speeds. They cared about keeping us out and to have some kind of standard that was going to do that. So we made the forcible case that wireless is able to give you mobility. It's able to be upgradable. It's better, it's more resilient. It gets deployed more quickly. So when there was a $65 billion that, getting figured out, 42.5 billion of that is going straight to the states. We'll talk about more in detail. We want an explicit requirement that it be technologically neutral, and we got the 100 down to 120, which meant the upload speeds were ones that we could meet with 5G. Now, I can't say that, we want everything we wanted. We got speeds of deployment in the bill, and again, that wasn't even on the table before the testimony, and that's really good for wireless, because if you want to build fiber out, and, I love fiber, it's a key part of the network, but it's going to take a long, long time. And, there may be a decade to get all these really tough rural areas built out. It's more expensive. Congress didn't care about it being more expensive. Like, we have all this money, we're going to build it right the first time, and then it'll be upgradable. That was the kind of lesson we were up against. And there's still that bias. I got to say, the bias certainly in the administration is toward fiber. But, in the end, fiber deeper in the network will help wireless. It's one of the biggest obstacles to getting wireless built. So we're going to be able to get those rural towers easier and more quickly powered up and get backhaul. So people have asked about, the timeline on this. The timeline, in May outlining this, and we're lobbying really hard right now to make sure that it doesn't bias against wireless. And there's a struggle between the White House and the Commerce Department about what it's going to be. The Commerce Department gets it, but there's some people in the White House who don't know what they're doing, frankly, and they are pushing really hard for fiber. But I think that, it's going to take a little longer to get the money out the door, because no funding can be spent until these maps are in place. And we're hearing from NTI sources that the maps really won't be completed until late summer. And then the funding, as a result, they got to, the state's got to come up with their plans and respond back, and they're going to get their allocation after the maps go out. So really, you're not going to see a lot of money coming out until 2023 for that big pot of 42.5 billion. But there's already a lot of other money in the pipeline, as hopefully you have seen in your businesses. There's this emergency connectivity fund at $7 billion for schools and libraries. There's the Treasury Department's coronavirus capital projects fund that was in the what's called the ARPA to respond to the big crisis. They passed this gargantuan bill in March of 2021, and there's $10 billion in there basically for broadband. It used some funny language to get to it, but this really showed where the White House was coming from. The Treasury Department doesn't know boo about broadband, so there's nobody there to kind of stand up to the White House and say, let's do a technologically neutral approach. So the White House basically told them, you're going to do 100-100. So they put out this rule that said any money coming out under this $10 billion has to meet 100-100 standard, has to have 100 megabits upload, which, as I said, of course, is hard for wireless to do at this point. We'll be able to get there. But right now, it was designed to kind of force fiber. As a matter of fact, the Treasury Department said, we prefer fiber. And you should do fiber unless there's some impracticality, or it's impractical due to geography or topography or cost. So that's the bias we're up against. And the problem is that kind of set the table for a lot of states that they put in place rules that said you have to have 100-100. That's kind of a problem. But some states are better than others, and we'll get into that. As the previous panel said, I think Ron was saying, there's another $350 billion in that fund that they can use for all kinds of purposes, including broadband. So not only this $10 billion, but $350 billion. And a lot of states are using that to leverage broadband, and they're not always requiring it. It has a premium under the law on projects that, it's not under the law, it's under the regulation that have 100-100, but they allow 25.3 as a minimum service standard. So it's actually able to do wireless. And then there's the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF, under the USF, Universal Service Fund, $20 billion more coming out. It's already coming out the door. So there is a lot of funding out there like I've never seen. When I ran the Rural Utility Service under the Recovery Act, we had about $3 billion. We thought that was a lot of money. And now there's already this $10 billion, and there's, $350 more to choose from, and here's $65 more billion. It's crazy, and I could barely find $3 billion worth of projects that were worthwhile, to be honest with you, back in 2010, 2011. We got 30 billion applications. I had to throw 27 billion out because they weren't financially or technically feasible. What that meant was it wasn't even competitive. In the end, if you submitted to us an application that actually worked, we were going to fund it because we didn't have any other, applications to get the money out the door. And the vice president was breathing down my neck, a guy named Joe Biden, saying, "Get this money out the door." And I said, "Well, what should we do?" He said, "Give yourselves more freaking flexibility." This is actually what he told me. I've never forgotten it, because we went back and we said, we need to have freaking flexibility to get this money out the door. So when we were designing the new rules, whenever there was a question about a rule, I said, let's make it more flexible so we can pick and choose what we want to do. And this is what I testified in front of Congress we should do. This is what I'm talking to the regulators about. I said, I wish they'd heard their president, in the administration, who's got a little bit more wisdom than some of the staff that's working for him, that recognize that if you want to get this money out the door and get it out quickly, you need to have some freaking flexibility. And by the way, that's not edited to be PG. He actually said that. He used that F word, not the other one. We have the states are going to get going. We're really engaged on a state level at WIA. We work really hard in the states to get our message out. We had 32 small cell bills we got enacted. You can see a lot of the country, including a lot of this region, are covered in streamlined small cell bills. This was a monumental effort, a huge commitment of resources by our board, because we had to hire lobbyists in all these states to make sure it got done right. We wanted to streamline small cell deployment, but we also wanted to make sure that it didn't, hurt the tower industry by putting towers anywhere people wanted to put them. So each one of these has height limits. We made sure it was in the rights of way where it belongs, so that the community backlash wouldn't occur to us. So they're very carefully crafted bills that streamline the process but protect the industry at the same time. And it was a lot of adjustments. In each one of those states, we were fighting out. And now we're doing it all over again. We're going to take this program, and we don't have lobbyists in every state, but we got lobbyists in about 28 left. We added some more because this implementation of the infrastructure funding is going to be a big fight in a lot of states. And state legislatures are looking into it, state regulators are looking into it. And so in preparing for this battle over the states, we did an analysis. We asked Tilson, who's a sponsor here, to do a study of how ready states were to spend these funds and what were their sort of biases. Were they pro-fiber? Are they pro-wireless? Because the law is super open-ended in terms of what states can do. We were kind of battling with the wireless folks, the fiber folks, and the cabal I talked about in the legislation, and we got speed to deployment built in there, which helped us, and they got this provision that said states can basically do, whatever they want, add new requirements on top of what is in the congressional, which is kind of unusual for Congress to say, here's the rules, and by the way, you can just add more. This is not good for us, because then we got to go back and fight in every state and figure out, the law is really open-ended. It's the same thing in NTIA. So, we're far from, if we lost the fight in Congress, we would have lost the war right there, that battle. But now we got other battles to fight, and the war is still on. So excuse me, this study found, vastly different levels of readiness among the states. You can see that they're all over the map in terms of whether they're ready, excuse me, whether they're ready to actually implement the program. Some have passed legislation, some have proposed it, some haven't done much of anything. And I'm going to go into all the states here in our region, kind of what's going on here in the South Wireless Summit states in terms of where they're at. All of the states at South Wireless Summit have some form of existing state broadband program except for Mississippi. I don't know if the Stouts are here. We'll have to get them on that. So here's kind of, the lay of the land. All of either actively funding legislation or they got legislation passed in every state, which is good. The overall state of readiness, though, is concerning because 22% nationwide have no evidence of having planned to get this money out the door. 22%. You're better off in this region, fortunately, in the South Wireless region. Of course, a lot of you operate in other states as well that have pre-existing programs. Basically, all states in the South Wireless Summit region have gotten ready, except for Mississippi and Oklahoma. Other South Wireless states have some sort of pre-existing programs to implement federal funding, so they're doing pretty well. And the other issue that we looked at was, as I said, I was concerned about, where are the states in terms of broadband? Do they want wireless? Are they just all pro-fiber? So Tilson surveyed the states in terms of their receptivity to funding wireless broadband. And what they found was that it was a pretty mixed bag. Almost half the states have a favorable view of wireless, which sounds pretty good, unless you realize half the states don't. When it comes to 24% are neutral, 30% are actually negative on it, really pro-fiber. Now, don't get your hopes up that the 50% that are open to wireless are going to really necessarily fund it or are going to fund it as readily as they are fiber. We have a lot of work to do to turn that around. But again, we're fortunate here in the South Wireless Summit territories that you're a little bit ahead of the national numbers. You can see that the receptiveness to wireless is actually better here, except in Arkansas, which is neutral. So there's no states that are negative. None of those 30% that are negative are in this region. And Arkansas is neutral. So I just want to real quickly kind of go through some of these states in alphabetical order and talk about kind of what's happening in those states. Like we'll start with Alabama here. There it is. Alabama's Broadband Accessibility Fund mandates the 25.3 standard, which is good for us. And it utilizes a broadband rating criteria that balances cost, speed, and ability of a given project to serve as many unserved areas as possible with a tech-neutral approach. That's really a good kind of program. Now, Arkansas, the example of, a state that has passed legislation, but why do we call it neutral? Well, Arkansas originally favored speed requirements that were friendly towards wireless, but in August of 21, they passed a law that in the Arkansas Economic Development Commission revised the program so that to meet Treasury's guidance that I talked about, they raised the standard to 100 under ARPA. So that excludes wireless. But, I don't think that's the only reason they did it. So we don't think they're necessarily negative. But this is why we're fighting states from relying on that old Treasury program to come up with a 100 standard. The big state of Florida, we have a lobbyist there, Cynthia Henderson. They passed legislation, and they're really open to wireless. They recently adopted a broadband opportunity grant program that they passed a law in 21 that has a discount that favors wireline deployment. So it's a little negative, but it prioritizes infrastructure projects that are scalable to 110, so we can meet that. And in the definition of underserved areas, it requires eligible projects to meet a 25.3 standard. So the law is one that really is wide open for wireless. And there's bipartisan support for expanding broadband access in Florida, in a way that is really, I think, open to wireless. So that's good news. In Louisiana, they're actively funding right now programs. In 21, they passed a law that defines broadband at a 25.3 standard. So, the state is very favorable in that regard to our industry. And we're going to see that, we get similar receptiveness to wireless in the way that they work under the IIJA, the new infrastructure bill. I talk about Mississippi is a little behind on their planning. They're okay with wireless though so far. While they're a bit behind there, they're trying to make sure that there's a bill that's underway in the legislature there to create a broadband commission, and that does not adopt the specific speeds. We don't know what they're going to do yet. They're deferring to the commission in terms of what speeds they want to determine later are appropriate, and we're hopeful we can convince them to be open to wireless. North Carolina is really thoughtful state. To talk to the folks there, very receptive to wireless. They're actively funding programs now. They already have both a co-location and small cell streamlining laws in place, and they're actively really pushing to get all kinds of programs out to unserved area. The governor there, Governor Cooper, set up a remote learning working group that focused on connecting students, and that included wireless as part of the solution. And so they work to get Wi-Fi access when possible and distribute wireless hotspots. So North Carolina has been good. Oklahoma has passed its wireless. Actually, they haven't passed it yet. They introduced a bill, but it's not yet been enacted yet, that creates the Oklahoma Broadband Expansion Act, and that's going to, again, create one of these councils. Some states are delegating to these commissions or councils what they're going to do, and that office is going to determine later what speeds we need to incorporate. So we're going to find out. Hopefully, Oklahoma will again be open to us. So far, we haven't seen any issues there. South Carolina is really thoughtful as well in what we've seen. We have a lobbyist there, Kenny Bingham, that represents WIA from Adams and Reese. They're really open to wireless. I've talked to the broadband director there, and they have a state broadband grant program, about a $30 million program that is already putting out awards that include wireless. They're funding one, for example, in Allendale County that is one of the most rural parts of South Carolina that provides fixed wireless access to 1,000 homes out there. So they're going to use a private LTE fixed wireless network using CBRS. Kind of cool. So look, they're really thinking thoughtfully about that. I mean, this is a solution that can work all over the country if this sort of fiber bias doesn't stop us from getting some of these awards. There's still a lot of places without service in South Carolina, so they got a long way to go. Here in Tennessee, right where we are, we have a lobbyist here. Martha Gentry represents WIA in Tennessee. You need a battery in this thing. There we go. Oh, wireless power. Uh-oh. I've screwed up now royally. Well, I'm just going to have to say the states and hope for the best. Oh, hey, hallelujah. So Tennessee has been really favorable to wireless as well. They introduced a bill that will exempt purchases and leases of broadband equipment from the sales tax, to allow 100% of federal money coming into Tennessee to be used for broadband deployment. It's got a small cell bill that's in line with what we proposed, and it's really an attractive state for broadband deployment. Texas is receptive to wireless as well. They passed legislation creating a broadband development office, and they're awarding grants and loans to expand broadband access under ARPA, and they have not put in speed requirements that are going to be incompatible with wireless. Where I live in Virginia, we also have a lobbyist. We've had a few little back and forth in the state of Virginia over legislation. We have Ken Hutchinson representing us there, and they are very favorable to wireless as well. We've seen some projects in Virginia that are funding wireless programs in the sort of southwestern part of the state, using fixed wireless as a solution to help close the digital divide. There's one really cool project out in Roanoke and Gloucester and Montgomery counties that is using fixed wireless to get out there. a long way to go, but certainly Virginia is open to this. So, each state is a battle in itself.
Jonathan, I don't see Kentucky in there. Is that because we're a Commonwealth?
Oh my gosh, what happened? Uh-oh. I guess Georgia isn't. We didn't. Is Georgia a member of these? It's a funny thing. Georgia is actually good. We have a lobbyist in Georgia, and Georgia is favorable to wireless as well. I don't know what happened to Kentucky and Georgia. Geez, they didn't. We're not going to go into secession or anything like that.
I live in Kentucky.
I love Kentucky.
Virginia's a Commonwealth too. They just got the two Commonwealths.
It's definitely not having to do with whether it's a Commonwealth. That is not the issue. Let's see. I don't have any excuse. But I understand that. I know that Georgia is also very receptive to wireless. They have been funding wireless projects already. Again, they're really out front with a flexible approach. I'm not sure about Kentucky. I didn't research that one as well as I should have. I'm very sorry. The home of bluegrass.
We're just teasing.
No, I'm glad you pointed it out. My bad. But, you have to take back that honorarium. We talked a bit about the state of the industry here. I just wanted to touch real briefly. I mean, you heard a lot on the last panel about that, about the massive investment that's being made right now by, of course, it's so good to see Dish in and Dave Mayo cranking more funding out the door, and all the other carriers really active. I mean, to see this many carriers active at once is something I don't know if I've ever seen in my 10 years at WIA. And of course, the spectrum auctions had a lot to do with that we talked about on the last panel. The FCC just did $22.5 billion on that recent auction for the 2.5 to 3.5. AT&T spent 9.1, Dish 7.3. He was talking about that good spectrum. It's the spectrum that they put out at the FCC has really done great. The C-band has been really such a boon for us. And one of the things we talk about sometimes that people don't recognize that we should be playing up is how good 5G is for the environment. It actually, in so many ways, helps to combat climate change. I mean, there's things like smart factories, smart cars you can't do without 5G. More efficient use of the grid, precision farming, smart factories. So many ways that we make energy usage more efficient that the World Economic Forum, not our industry, but the World Economic Forum said we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through 5G and other digital technologies by 15% by 2030. And 15%, the goal is to reduce it by 50%. So 1/3 of that is being contributed by our industry. So we should be proud of what we're doing and really roll that out. But not everybody recognizes it. Sometimes we catch hell. We talked a little bit on the last panel about the FAA. I just wanted to talk about that little mess that we had at the FAA. It's one of the craziest things I've seen. And I've seen some crazy things in Washington, but usually our industry, actually it's been fairly, rational. But this one didn't work out that way. I mean, the C-band was something that the FAA should have seen coming in the aviation industry. I mean, in 2020, the FCC did extensive rulemaking, listened to everything they had to say, and determined there was no issue. Because it had a 400 megahertz guard band. I mean, we've never seen guard bands. When I was at the FCC, we used to talk about a 2-3 megahertz guard band, and people were fighting over whether it be 2, 3, or 4. And here's 400 megahertz at first. It's going to get down to 200 when they do the upper part of the band. Just enormous amount of space. So what the hell would this affect altimeters for? As a matter of fact, I really don't think it does. But, there was one flawed study that the industry put out itself, the aviation industry, saying, and I'm not going to go into all the flaws in the study, but it's been completely debunked. But it looked like it might affect some altimeters. And because they hadn't really bothered to figure it out, and this wasn't until after the C-band auction closed. It was 2020, and then 2021, the auction closes. It's on November 2nd, 2021, and we're 2 months or a month out from launching nationwide after having paid $80 billion, AT&T and Verizon for C-band spectrum, that the FAA started to freak out about this and issued a notice saying, we need to collect some data about altimeters. They had 2 years, they did nothing. And so the carriers agreed to delay the rollout twice, even though all of our studies showed there was really no serious issues. I mean, nobody wants consumer-facing companies like that can't afford to be, making the public nervous. And the FAA was threatening to ground these planes. So AT&T, Verizon then waited again, 2 delays. I mean, if you spent, $80 million. You had to sit on it for a year before you use it. And then finally, when you're about to put it in and you have all these ads ready to roll out and everything, to have to put that in your pocket without any revenue being generated from that, it's a tough business, you know, and this was not appropriate. And in January, you know, the FAA began issuing warnings regarding interference near airports. But, you know, what I pointed out to the agencies and on national TV is that, you know, there's 40 countries that are operating in this band without any problem. And they've been doing it for a year or two. Not one issue on any flight. As a matter of fact, some of them had much higher power and they were much closer, within 100 megahertz of the altimeters. So it was kind of not a real world problem. I think the FAA is starting to figure this out. They already approved 90% of the commercial plane fleet to land when visibility is low, relying on altimeters. They haven't quite gotten through all of them. They might have gotten through a few more by now, since I saw that figure. So basically, they're proving what we said all along, which is not an issue. As they start going through and looking at these individual altimeters, they're realizing that there really isn't interference from that far. And, you know, the fact of the matter is, if there is interference, it's because of the altimeters, not because of us. I mean, those altimeters should not be receiving, you know, emissions from 400 megahertz away, unless they're really cheap, bad altimeters, and then they should have gotten them fixed years ago. But, you know, I think the industry was really good in cooperating, and I don't think we'll ever see any problem. And I think eventually it's going to diminish this problem because there's not substantive issue underneath it. I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges, and Todd Schleckaway here talked about this, and he has been a leader in trying to, you know, work with us and the whole industry on workforce issues. You know, as representatives of the contractors, we got a lot of GCs here. You know, I was pleased to hear on the last panel these folks weren't having trouble, and I think one of the reasons they're not having trouble is that they do manage their vendor relationships and their contractors very well. I think you're all aware that not everybody does that. And those who don't are going to pay, I think, a pretty severe price coming up, because I was at a contractor conference recently called PCCA, and they are just overwhelmed with work in rural areas. They do a lot of fiber work, a little bit of wireless, and they can't even manage the amount of work coming in the door. And the reason is they've got to manage, not only they've got a workforce shortage, skilled workforce shortage, they can't get equipment like yellow trucks, you know, bucket trucks, shortage of materials, over a year-long delay in fiber right now, and all kinds of, you know, devices and, you know, including some wireless equipment that's missing one little piece that makes it they can't produce that. So the supply chain is really causing issues. And if you're a contractor, as you contractors in the room well know, you have to have all three of those sequenced and ready, staged at once, or you're sitting there eating, you know, capital and paying, you know, money out the door for one without being able to implement it and generate revenue. So it's going to be, I think, really tough. And when that money starts flowing in the door, on top of all this private business that we talked about, and, you know, next year is going to be big too, what we heard on the last panel, all of a sudden you're going to have this $45 billion start flowing in. It's going to be very difficult to get that money out the door quickly. And policymakers have no idea. I can tell you the folks in Washington are completely unaware, you know, not maybe completely, but they're really not up to speed on how bad it's going to be and how bad the delays are going to be. And that's another reason if they put everything in fiber, you know, when you got bottlenecks, you don't want to put everything in one place where you're just going to increase the bottleneck in that issue. And already there's a bottleneck in getting fiber built out. I mean, there'll be bottlenecks in everything, including wireless, fiber, but try to distribute it widely so you can get this thing built and people can get service more quickly. It's really a challenge when you already have, you know, too much demand, not enough supply, and all these things. Congress is putting more demand on, which is a good thing, but, you know, it's going to be a challenge for all of us. So I do think it's a good idea to, you know, pay your contractors early and make sure that, you know, you manage those things well. Otherwise, you're going to find out when time comes to work. What I've heard from contractors is they're starting to pick their customers. I've never heard that before. But they say, I don't have enough work to do. I don't have enough ability to do the work that's coming in the door. I'm going to pick who I'm going to work for. So treat them well, my advice. You know, and we're trying to do what we can to help. WIA has, and I see Todd here, you know, Nate's done some great work on workforce development. We created the Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Program a few years back, and we have some of my staff in the room here. Rick Thacker, Emily is here, and Brent is here. You talked to our team about what we're doing with TIRAP, you know, to solve this shortage of skilled labor. we created this registered apprenticeship program, and it's really starting to pick up. I mean, it's the first and really premier registered apprenticeship program in our industry. So what we do is we partner with employers. We've got a lot of employers signed up. 67 employers have signed up 2,900 apprentices to give them resources and guidance. And what it does for the employer is it helps recruit people. Right now, when we're having a hard time getting people into our industry, if you tell them we got an apprenticeship program and you have a career path and you're going to be able to move up the chain and you can earn while you learn when you first get in, they sign up much more. And the documentation shows over time that apprenticeship increases retention, which has been a huge issue in our industry, where you're seeing people kind of recirculate and go to another person for another 15 cents an hour or whatever. If they've got an apprenticeship program where they know they've got a future and the company is investing in them, the company cares about them, it helps. And there's sometimes an impression that this is a union thing. This is the farthest thing is the opposite of a union deal. As a matter of fact, not one of those 67 employers are in a union, and this is how you basically, if you're an employer, who needs a union if the employer's doing their own apprenticeship? It actually helps keep them from organizing because the employer takes care of its workers and there's no need for a union. So the workers really appreciate it too, having a credential. We've come up with 12 different DOL recognized occupations, everything from tower technician, fiber optic technician, small cell technician, 12 different ways. So there's really, a need to do this. So, we'd love to talk to you about it if you want. And another thing that we've done is to create the Telecommunications the Technology Education Center, TEC, which is the, Rick and Thacker is here to teach, as a matter of fact, from it this afternoon. We're going to try to solve some of the workforce challenges for our own industry and bring together academics, bring together subject matter experts from our industry. We're in a unique position as a trade association to say what is the latest and greatest that people need to do to develop a curriculum to inform educational institutions, and we deliver directly our own training. So the tech team is going to do a Spectrum fundamentals course. I learn something every time I see Dr. Thacker, so I'm definitely sticking around for that because it's a must-have training for everyone in our industry. As a matter of fact, a lot of the companies here in this room, like Vertical Bridge and TowerCo and others, have actually put their entire staff through this. They start with a small group and they go, that's pretty good. And you think you'll find out that you've been in the industry your whole life, you know this stuff. And I certainly thought that. But we have these engineers that are doing this work every day that take the course from like NB and C, put their entire team through it, that have never had it all put in one place. So we'll go out to your company, and we have a growing catalog that Rick can help us to develop with 30 courses that help employers to educate and train their workforce, including the most senior members of your team. So it's really something we're very proud of, and it's done. It's growing in leaps and bounds. And one of the things I think kind of shows that is we just won a contract with Ashland University and Youngstown State University in Ohio to bring a first of its kind training program to them to equip students with the latest competencies that they need to deploy this infrastructure. Now, we need to get this program into schools so that we have people coming out that will deal with that workforce shortage. And it's something that Nate's working on in some schools in Ohio as well for tower techs, and we're doing this 5G program. And the Ohio Governor's Office gave both Nate and WIA awards to do this kind of work, and it's exactly the kind of investment I think states need to be making. We got to see more states doing it. Ohio's been a model, and Ohio is also just gave us an award to be their 5G sector partnership partner in Ohio through Ohio State. So for more advanced, not for technical school, but for more advanced career opportunities, we're going to work with them to create an industry-focused curriculum on broadband and 5G technologies. So we're bringing together the experts from the industry to educate the folks at Ohio State on a plan and to give them insights where the skill gaps are in broadband, help them with their workforce development programs, and make sure that the entire state 5G plan works. Now, I think a lot more states should do this. It's really something that could be a model around the country, and I think other states will follow in our footsteps. We're already talking to some other states about it, And if we can get this going nationwide, we won't have this workforce shortage when we come back to the South Wireless Summit, the 20th anniversary or whatever. Hopefully it won't take us that long, but, you know. Well, I think I'll be working somewhere. I'll probably be teaching at Ohio State if nobody else picks it up. If you're a tough grader, I'm a pain in the ass. I used to be a TA myself. Anyway, it's a hell of an industry to be in. I'm glad, even if I'm not at WIA, will be in this industry because there's so much going on, as we heard in the last panel, from all these new customers with private enterprise and all the carriers going full blast. And I mean, with 5G, so many different ways this business is going to evolve. And so it's been great to be, representing all of you wonderful folks in Washington, the States. And, it's a challenging time for the industry. I'm kind of sad to leave WIA, but I'm thrilled to stay in the industry. I'm going to stick around through the show, through ConnectX in Denver. Hope to see you all in Denver. And thanks for having me here this morning.
We have time for about 3 questions. Raise your hand.
Sharp always gets the first question. Why is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because I always sit at the front. Jonathan, the FCC on a regular basis is giving out money for rural development of wireless, and I was wondering, how does that integrate or work with the 68 billion or 65 billion that's going out to the states? Because this appears to be directly from the FCC. I don't know, is it going to the states or who is it going to, and how does that all work together? And is it hard to keep that all straight?
It is a great question. How does the FCC? So the FCC has been doing universal service for as an explicit program since the 1996 Act. So the idea was AT&T used to be providing universal service to the country, but they made it explicit in 96, and then the FCC would take money and they charge everybody on their phone bills, then redistribute it to make sure that the entire country is covered through grants to rural providers. And then under Chairman Pai, they created this thing called the RDOF program that I talked about. And the RDOF program is the biggest investment ever made, but it was already underway as Congress was looking to fill these gaps. And RDOF is different. It goes directly from the FCC to providers. It's what's called a reverse auction, so that people sort of bid lower and lower numbers in order to get the work, and then they get what are going to be much lower subsidy rates than what's in this other program. I'm kind of interested to see how that works out, because at RDOF, you're basically bidding, the lowest bidder wins. I would never do that for my kitchen remodel, but that's the way that they're doing it. And the result is that, of course, some of these companies can't deliver what they said they can deliver. So it's become a little bit controversial. I think it's one of the reasons that Congress didn't give FCC the big chunk of money, gave it to NTIA instead. And NTIA, rather than doing a reverse auction, where you get as much subsidy as is left on the table after you do the low bid, which ends up being a much lower subsidy rate. It might be 20, 30%, depending on the project. 75 cents out of the dollar in this infrastructure bill is paid for by the government. So you still got to put up 25%, but you get 75% paid for. So it's much more generous than the RDOF program. And they go on top of each other. Now there's an interagency working group that was established to try to coordinate all that, but I wouldn't count on excessive coordination. I mean, it's a little sloppy, but I tell you, if I was going for the money, I'd rather have that, other fund that has a much more favorable sort of subsidy rate.
Have you noticed, are the RDOF funds going to wireless, or are they going to wireline? Where do you see that money actually going to?
RDOF is a real mix of wireline and wireless. It's been really open to wireless. As a matter of fact, a lot of money went to satellite, to Elon Musk, and there's a sort of a question of whether he can deliver what he promised on that. So everybody is open if they can deliver the service requirement under RDOF, including wireless and wireline. There's no bias whatsoever against wireless, and wireless actually won quite a few of the awards. So none of this, kind of fiber bent that we've seen under the IIJA. So it is a good place to go for wireless projects if you can win the bid and you can actually make a profit afterwards, because these are some tough markets to serve. You know, there's a reason nobody's there. They're the worst markets in the country from an economic point of view. And so wireless makes a lot of sense because it's so much cheaper to deliver. And that's why I think wireless won a fairly large portion of recent RDOF grants. But there's a lot more RDOF money in the till, and there's some talk about actually translating some of that into a mobility fund. Because of the FCC's thinking, what do I do now with this money I was going to put out the door into this old program? How does it fit? They may rework the next tranche of funding. I think they still have $10 billion to give out.
Thanks. Mr. Foley.
Jonathan, I know the next panel is a regulatory panel, but I wonder if you had any crystal ball thoughts about where this FCC might take the subjects of spectrum and location accuracy.
Well, you know, I think on spectrum, they're trying to identify as much commercial spectrum as they can. There's just not a lot in the pipeline right now. You know, they got this auction they just did and another coming up. So they're trying to find more spectrum they can refarm from government use to shared and generally shared use with the private sector. I'm not sure how much more they come up with, but it's been a bipartisan commitment that she is, Chairman Rosenworcel is really, I think, devoted to. On location accuracy, again, I think that there's a real commitment to the FCC on a bipartisan basis to do everything they can to facilitate location accuracy. And I think, you know, some of the work you're doing on inside buildings where there's a lot more, it gets more opaque for first responders to figure out where exactly within a building somebody is, that they're certainly, I think, very open to any need for regulatory improvements to help solve that problem for first responders. The FCC, generally speaking, has always been super pro public safety, sometimes too much so. Like in the D block, when before FirstNet, they tried doing everything that public safety wanted, and as a result, nobody in the private sector would even bid on the project. So they had to revise that. It was like a 4-year delay, and that was when I was at the FCC. I felt terrible about it because that spectrum never got put to use until finally FirstNet got created, and thank goodness that's out there now, providing service and really helping first responders. And they, I think, want to see more location accuracy within buildings as well. So that might drive it forward.
One more question. Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you, everybody.